I straightened the sleeves of my graduation gown as the dean read my name. My parents sat somewhere near the back, their faces still and unreadable. The applause rose around me. But I kept my eyes forward as I crossed the stage. The spotlight was warm against my face, and I tried not to tremble. I heard my name again, this time followed by something they hadn't expected. Recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship and a Goldman Sachs offer. I stepped down slowly, my heart steady. This was the moment I'd built toward. For years, the moment they would finally see who I had become. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and tap that like button if you've ever had to carry your own dreams without anyone to cheer you on. My name's Morgan Taylor. I'm 29 now, and most people know me as a financial analyst with a decent title and a corner office in Manhattan. But back then, I was just a girl in Connecticut doing her homework at the kitchen table while her little sister danced circles around her. We lived in a quiet town where front porches had flower boxes and neighbors waved from their driveways. My dad, Richard, worked long hours at an accounting firm downtown. He wore the same navy suit every Monday. My mom, Diana, showed houses when the market was good and kept fresh-baked cookies on the counter when it wasn't. They believed in hard work and modesty. In doing things right, we weren't rich, but we had what we needed. The kind of life where birthdays meant sheet cake from the local grocery store and family vacations meant Florida. Every other summer I was 12 when Emma was born. I remember taping butterfly decals to the nursery wall while my mother hummed softly, folding little onesies and baby socks. I imagined being the kind of big sister who taught her how to ride a bike, who helped her pick out earrings for her first dance. At first, it felt like that might happen. My father lit up whenever he talked about his girls. The baby was his princess, and I didn't mind. Not really. Things shifted slowly, like wallpaper peeling at the corners. At 14, I asked for a second-hand laptop for school. Nothing fancy, just something I could use for papers. They said they'd think about it 2 weeks later. They came home with a handcrafted dollhouse for Emma. She was 2 years old and didn't know how to open the tiny doors. I said nothing. My mother just smiled and touched my shoulder. "You're so mature for your age, Morgan." Emma needs small joys while she's little. I kept my grades perfect. Captained. The debate team worked shifts at the library after school. They clapped at my awards, but only briefly. "That's nice, honey," my mom would say before switching the subject to Emma's latest dance recital, or the glitter drawing she made in Sunday school. I asked for a car when I turned 16, not a new one, just something to get me to school and back. They said I'd have to work for it, so I did it. Took almost a year of shelving books and watching every dollar, but I bought a used Civic that broke down more than it ran on Emma's 16th birthday. My parents surprised her with a new Beetle, bright blue with custom seat covers and a speaker system I could hear from down the street. "Emma isn't as responsible as you." My dad said she needs something safe, reliable. I nodded, like that made sense. I thought if I worked hard enough, they'd notice I applied to 12 colleges, wrote scholarship essays after my shifts at Applebee's, and still managed to keep my GPA high. Harvard, Yale, Princeton offers came in, and I thought maybe this was it. Maybe they'd finally say they were proud of me. Instead, they sat me down in the kitchen and told me the money wasn't there. They had none saved for my education, not a cent, and those schools, even with scholarships, were out of reach. I remember asking about the college fund Grandpa had once mentioned. Years ago, my parents exchanged a glance. I didn't understand. Then it had to be reallocated. My father said, "We had the kitchen renovation, remember? And some investments that didn't work out. You'll need to consider state schools and more scholarships." I nodded and went to my room and cried into my pillow for the first time in years. That night, I made myself a quiet promise. I would find a way forward with or without their help. I enrolled at Connecticut State that fall with 2 suitcases, a used laptop, and a campus job lined up before orientation even started. It wasn't the dream I'd worked for, but it was the only option left. The scholarship covered part of tuition, and I made up the rest with work, study, and shifts at Applebee's. I stacked my schedule with early morning classes, so I could work in the evenings and picked up extra shifts on weekends when I wasn't studying. I was working, and when I wasn't working, I was too tired to do much else. By sophomore year, I'd stopped going home altogether. I told my parents I was busy over the holidays and too slammed to take time off. But the truth was harder. I couldn't look them in the eye without remembering the way they'd closed that door. I couldn't sit at that kitchen table without feeling like I'd been left behind. Thanksgiving of junior year. My manager gave me a few unexpected days off, and I made the drive home. Emma was in her senior year by then, and as we passed the mashed potatoes around the table, she casually mentioned she'd applied early decision to NYU. My mother smiled. "We've already sent the deposit. She'll have a little apartment in Manhattan so she can really enjoy the city." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared down at my plate. Then the words slipped out. "How are you affording that?" The table went quiet. My father cleared his throat. "We made some financial adjustments, took out a second mortgage on the house. It's a stretch, but Emma deserves the full experience." My mother nodded. "Emma needs every advantage she can get. She's not as naturally academic as you. She needs the name on the diploma." I nodded once, excused myself from the table, and locked the bathroom door behind me. I sat on the floor staring at the tiled wall while voices floated down the hall. They were discussing neighborhoods in Manhattan, furniture ideas for Emma's apartment, and which weekend would be best for. Shopping back in my old bedroom, the shelves were still lined with trophies and ribbons, but they looked dull now, like leftover evidence from a story no one had ever read. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the reasons they said they couldn't help me about kitchen renovations and bad investments, and how none of it had ever added up. The next morning, I drove back to campus without saying much. The car was quiet. Emma waved from the porch, like nothing had happened after winter break. I adjusted my spring schedule, added an accounting class and a finance elective to my English major. I told myself it was just curiosity, but really I wanted answers. If I was ever going to understand what happened to the money that was supposed to be mine, I needed to learn the language they'd used to make it disappear. What I didn't expect was how much it made sense. Numbers came naturally to me in a way literature never had. Balancing accounts and following paper trails felt more honest than analyzing. Poems. By midterms, I had changed my major. Nobody at home asked about my classes anymore. They assumed I was still drifting, and I let them. I stopped sharing updates, stopped calling altogether. During the summer, I stayed on campus, took extra credits, and picked up shifts at the campus library. When the building emptied out for the night, I stayed behind scanning textbooks and sipping cheap coffee until the custodian turned off the lights. During spring break, I went home again, but with a plan. While my parents were at work, I went through the file cabinet in the home office. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly. I just kept snapping photos. Anything with a number went into my phone at the bottom of an old folder wedged behind retirement statements. I found a letter from my grandfather dated years ago. It mentioned a trust fund, $75,000 set aside for me when I was 8. For Morgan's bright future, he'd written, "This money is not to be used for anything else." My hands went cold. I read the letter twice, then sat back in the office chair staring at the wall. My parents had told me that money didn't exist. They said there was nothing set aside for me, and yet here it was, in writing. After that, I came home more often, but only when I knew the house would be empty. I went through more drawers, copied more statements. By the time senior year rolled around, I'd filled a digital folder with proof of what had been taken over winter break. I found something that made everything worse. Tucked inside a locked drawer in my father's desk were the inheritance papers from my maternal grandmother. She'd passed away when I was 14 and apparently left over $100,000 for my education. I'd never been told anything about it. Records showed the money was liquidated 6 months after she passed and transferred to a general account, the same account used to buy the lake house in Vermont that Christmas. I had lunch with my grandfather at a diner we used to go to. When I was little, I ordered the same sandwich I always had and waited until we were halfway through the meal before I said, "Grandpa, did you ever set up a college fund for me?" He looked surprised but not confused. "Of course I did. $75,000. I set it up before Emma was born. Your grandmother added to it before she passed." I nodded slowly. "Did you know I'm working 2 jobs just to stay in school while Mom and Dad took out a second mortgage for Emma's tuition?" His face tightened. He set down his fork and looked across the table at me. I suspected some things but didn't want to meddle. "It's their house, their children. I thought they'd do right by you, Morgan. I should have made the trust more secure. That's on me." He reached across the table and gave my hand a light squeeze. "Don't let this harden you. Family's still family." I nodded. not ready to speak, not because I disagreed, but because I didn't know what to do with what I now knew. I graduated from Connecticut State that spring, and instead of taking a full-time job, I enrolled in more courses at the local community college. I picked up new jobs, saved money, and said nothing. My parents thought I was lost. I let them think it. But behind the silence, I was building something steady. Brick by brick. I kept my days packed from sunrise to nightfall. My schedule didn't leave much room for doubt or distraction. Early mornings were for reading and case studies, then classes at community college followed by long hours at the investment firm where I worked as a junior analyst. I didn't have a formal title, but I handled reports that often made their way into senior meetings. My boss was a woman named Danielle Cook. She was sharp, never wasted words, and trusted me with real responsibilities sooner than most people would have expected. For someone with no graduate degree, she started looping me in on her calls by fall. I was reviewing asset portfolios and building pitch decks before I even applied to grad school. At night, I sat on the floor of my small apartment drafting application essays by hand. Before typing them clean the next day, the essays all asked the same question in different forms. "Tell us who you are," I tried to answer without bitterness. I wrote about work ethic, about growing up in a family where success was assumed, but support wasn't always there. Professor Jenkins read every draft. He crossed out half of one essay with a thick red pen and said, "You're still protecting them. Let the numbers speak louder." He helped me polish my story until it sounded like it came from someone who knew where she was going, not just someone running from where she'd been. I submitted my application to Wharton in October. The email confirmation came through right before Thanksgiving. That year, I skipped the holiday altogether, told my parents I was covering for someone at work. My mother didn't ask many questions, just reminded me to call Emma and wish her luck on her latest idea. A cooking blog this time, or maybe it was something with jewelry. A few weeks later, I received the envelope from Wharton. I opened it alone in the break room at work with a mug of cold tea in my hand. A full scholarship was included, courtesy of the Anderson family. I read the letter twice, then set it down and stared out the window for a long time. When I told Professor Jenkins, he smiled, but didn't look surprised. "You'll do fine," he said. "Just remember who you are when they all start making assumptions." I started classes in the spring. The move to Philadelphia was quiet. I told my family I'd be taking courses there and working part-time. I didn't mention the school or the scholarship or the internship. Lined up for the summer. It was easier that way. The campus felt different from anywhere I'd been. Everyone seemed to have arrived with some kind of legacy, a name, a connection, a polished confidence I'd only ever seen on TV. But inside the classroom, the same rules applied. Prepare, listen. Don't flinch. I liked the structure. I liked that no one expected me to fail, but no one handed me anything either. I kept my head down and let my work speak for itself. By the end of the first term, my professors were asking me to lead project groups and mentor students just a year younger than me. George and Caroline Anderson invited me to dinner. Not long after grades were released, we met at a quiet restaurant just off campus, the kind with linen napkins and soft lighting. Caroline asked about my classes, while George quizzed me gently on market trends. He nodded once when I answered, then said, "You remind me of my wife at your age." They sent me home that night with a list of recommended books and a handwritten note of encouragement. I tucked both into the back of my notebook and reread them whenever things felt heavy. Emma graduated from NYU that spring. She didn't attend her ceremony. My parents said she wasn't in the mood. They threw her a party instead and sent me a video of her opening a new laptop my mother mentioned in passing that they'd taken another loan to help Emma start her own business. It wasn't clear what the business was, only that it involved a website and photography equipment. I replied with a simple, "Congratulations," then turned my phone off for the weekend. I had an interview scheduled the next Monday with Goldman Sachs. The interviews ran over 6 weeks, 6 different meetings with 6 different teams. Every time I walked in, I reminded myself they didn't know my story. All they'd see was my resume and how I handled questions. So I focused on what I could control. I showed up, prepared, took notes, followed up with thank you emails, each one personalized, never too long, just enough to remind them what I brought to the table. By July, they offered me a position on the investment strategy team with a salary that made my hands shake when I saw it. The signing bonus alone would have covered my entire undergrad tuition. I didn't tell my family. I just told them I was busy with summer courses. My mother asked how community college was going. I said, "It's steady," she replied. "Not everyone's meant for big careers. It's okay to find your level." I said nothing. By then I had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia not far from campus. Quiet building, good light, no roommates. I decorated it with pieces I bought secondhand and repainted myself. White walls, soft wood, clean lines, no one questioned my choices or asked what I was trying to prove. I heard from my parents now and then, usually updates on Emma, a short-lived podcast, an online boutique that sold scarves. She didn't finish building the site during one call. My father said Emma's still trying to find her way. Not everyone figures it out early like you did. I stayed quiet again. Wharton wrapped its second year with a ceremony scheduled for mid-May. I debated whether to invite them in. The end, I decided they should see it not for my sake, but for theirs. I sent a short email. Nothing elaborate, just the date, time, and address. No mention of Wharton, no mention of honors or the scholarship or the job lined up. After my mother responded that they'd be there and that Emma had always wanted to visit Philadelphia anyway. As the date approached, I went over my notes again, planned seating and dinner arrangements, checked with the Andersons, confirmed that my grandfather would be attending too. Everything was in place. I picked up my gown and hung it on the door. I stood back and looked at it for a long time. The woman staring back from the mirror looked nothing like the girl who had walked out of that kitchen years ago. The morning of graduation was clear and quiet. I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window, watching the sun stretch across the city. The gown hung on the door just as I'd left it, pressed and ready. I dressed, slowly, checked my notes one last time, and slipped the leather folder into my bag. The ride to campus was short, barely 15 minutes, but I arrived early, walking through the courtyard before the chairs were even filled. Someone from the office waved and pointed to my seat, front row center next to a small placard with my name on it. The guests began to arrive just before 10. I spotted the Andersons first, Caroline in a pale blue suit, George in his usual dark gray. They found their seats easily and greeted the dean like old friends. My grandfather arrived next, using his cane and a steady pace. He smiled when he saw me, then took the seat reserved for him with a nod toward the stage. A few minutes later, my parents appeared, my father in the same navy suit he wore to church, my mother in a floral dress she had probably worn to 3 different weddings. Emma trailed behind them, her hair pulled back, phone in hand, scrolling as they walked. They didn't check the front rows. They slid into open seats near the back, chatting quietly as the music started. The dean stepped forward, gave the usual welcome, then began reading names one by one. I waited until mine came near the end of the program, the pause before it felt longer than the others. This year's recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship maintained a perfect 4. Sir. GPA completed multiple research projects and secured one of only 2 executive investment offers from Goldman Sachs. Please join me in congratulating Morgan Taylor. I walked across the stage, the applause steady, not thunderous but respectful enough. I looked only once toward the back, saw my mother's hand drop to her lap, saw Emma's mouth slightly open, her phone forgotten. I took my certificate, shook hands and returned to my seat. Then came the final surprise. The student speaker for the ceremony had fallen ill the day before, and the dean had asked if I would step in. I hadn't told anyone. I approached the podium as the crowd settled. I let the silence linger before I began. Thank you, Dean Williams, and thank you to the faculty for this honor. My path to this stage wasn't the smoothest, and it wasn't lined with obvious signs of success. I wasn't born into legacy or advantage. In fact, I was told often by people close to me that I probably wouldn't belong in rooms like this. I saw movement in the back. My father shifted in his seat. My mother adjusted her purse strap. I worked 2 jobs through college. I studied late at night, after closing shifts. I saved what I could, while others were given what they needed. Some of those others were in my own family, but today isn't about resentment. Today is about perseverance. It's about earning your place, even when no one holds the door open. The applause came slowly, then gathered strength. I stepped down and returned to my seat, my hands steady, my heart beat. Not after the ceremony. Families mingled in the courtyard. The Andersons found me first. George pulled me into a handshake. Caroline hugged me lightly over my shoulders. "You did us proud." She said my grandfather joined next, slipping me a card and patting my hand twice before stepping aside. My parents approached last, their smiles tight. My father spoke first. "Wharton, you've been at Wharton this whole time." I didn't get the chance to answer before George turned to him. "She's been with us for 2 years now. Absolutely exceptional in every way," Caroline added. "And tonight we're taking her to dinner. We've made reservations." I turned to my parents. "You're welcome to join us if you'd like. 7 o'clock. At Lysanne, Grandpa will be there." My mother blinked. "We were thinking Olive Garden." "Something simple." I nodded. This was already arranged. Emma looked at me closely, her voice quieter than usual. "You lied. You told us you were at community college." I said. "I was taking courses in Philadelphia." "That was true." I paused. I never said where or what program. They didn't argue, but the confusion lingered. We stood in the courtyard a few more minutes before parting ways. I returned to my apartment, changed quickly, and took the short cab ride to Lysanne. The top-floor dining room overlooked the city. The table was set for 8 with name cards I had printed myself. My parents arrived just before 7. Emma behind them. She looked around, then lowered her phone. The Andersons were already seated. My grandfather as well. Place cards had been arranged deliberately. My mother across from Caroline, my father across from George. Emma seated between them. The conversation began politely. My mother complimenting the table setting, my father noting the view. Caroline replied, "Morgan arranged everything beautifully. She always pays attention to detail." The waiter brought the first course, a small seafood dish with a citrus glaze. My mother studied it briefly before setting her fork down. I waited until the main course arrived. Filet mignon for most, a vegetarian risotto for Emma, then gently tapped my knife against my glass. "If I may, I'd like to offer a short toast." The table quieted, stood glass in hand, to education, to opportunity, and to truth. They all raised their glasses. I set mine down and looked directly at my parents. "I think it's time we talk about how I actually got here, because much of what's been said today implies support that was never given and sacrifices that were never made." My father shifted Morgan. "This isn't the time it is." I opened the folder beside my chair and slid the first letter across the table. "This is from Grandpa, dated 15 years ago. $75,000 set aside for my college education money. You told me didn't exist." My grandfather spoke quietly. "I created that account. It should have covered most of her undergraduate tuition." My mother stared at the paper. We had to use that money for family expenses. Things were tight. I opened a second document and placed it beside the first. "This is your financial statement. From that year, it shows over $300,000 in savings and a vacation booked to Hawaii." I turned to Emma. "I don't blame you for any of this, but you should know they took out a second mortgage to pay for your tuition, your apartment, your expenses, while telling me they couldn't spare a single dime for mine." Emma looked at them. "Is that true?" They didn't answer. I pulled out one last sheet. "This is the inheritance from Grandma. $100,000 left to me for college. Use only funds that never reached me." "Where did it go?" My grandfather answered again. "They used it for the lake house in Vermont." I found out later my mother looked away. "I'm not asking for repayment. I've covered my education through scholarships. I've accepted a position at Goldman Sachs. I'll be fine. This isn't about money. It's about truth and accountability." Emma remained silent, but her face had changed. Something behind her eyes had shifted. I didn't say more. Dessert arrived, but no one touched it. The Andersons asked a few quiet questions. My grandfather sat with his hands folded. The view outside the window turned to dusk as we left the restaurant. I saw Emma lag behind the others. She touched my arm lightly. "I didn't know any of that. I swear I know." She hesitated. "Will you show me how you did it? How you became—" "This I will." She gave a small nod and followed our parents toward the elevator. The days after the dinner were quiet. I didn't respond to the messages right away. My phone lit up with missed calls and voicemails from my parents, some defensive, some apologetic. I let them sit. Emma texted once, just 3 words. "Can we talk?" We met at a small cafe near my apartment on a Wednesday morning. She arrived alone. No makeup, no designer bag, just jeans and a sweater. She hadn't worn anything like that in years. We found a table by the window. She ordered tea, I ordered black coffee. We sat for a minute before she spoke. "I've been thinking about everything you said." She looked out the window, then back at me. I knew they treated us differently, but I didn't know how far it went. Not the money, not your jobs, not the inheritance. I waited when I wanted to study biology. They said it wasn't the right fit. She gave a small shrug, said, "I'd be better off doing something visual, something that didn't require too much pressure." Her fingers traced the edge of her teacup. I thought they were protecting me, but maybe they just didn't think I could handle more. She glanced up, once, then looked back down. "I'm not saying what happened to you wasn't worse. I got everything I asked for. But somehow I still feel like I don't know who I am." I stayed quiet and let her keep going. They told me what to wear, what to study, where to live, and when things didn't work out, they just moved me to the next thing. No one ever asked what I actually wanted. She let out a breath. "I don't want to be that girl anymore, the one who needs them for everything. I want to figure things out on my own." She paused, then asked quietly, "Will you help me?" I nodded once. Yes, later that week, Grandpa called and invited both of us to lunch. We met him at a small diner 2 blocks from his hotel. He ordered the same sandwich he always had. Emma got soup. I stuck with coffee once we settled in. He leaned forward, both hands on the table. "I've been thinking about that dinner," he said. "There's more to this story than either of you." "No?" Emma looked up. "What do you mean?" He folded his napkin slowly. "Your mother grew up in a home where she was the forgotten one. Her brother got all the praise, all the resources, she got the leftovers, and your father had the same experience, his sister was the star. He was just the background. He looked at both of us when they had you two. They fell into the same pattern without realizing it. Diana saw herself in Emma, the overlooked child she used to be, and Richard stood back just like his own father did." Emma's spoon clinked against her bowl. "She didn't touch the soup that explains it," I said, "but it doesn't excuse it." Grandpa nodded. "No, it doesn't. And I should have stepped in sooner." I saw what was happening and kept out of it. I regret that the following week brought a call from my father. He asked to meet somewhere quiet. We chose the park near our old neighborhood, the one with the pond and the walking trail. We sat on a bench under a tree. I waited for him to speak. "I've been going over everything in my head," he said, trying to understand how I justified what we did to you. He paused, watched a duck skim across the water. "Your mother drove most of the financial decisions, but I didn't stop her because I told myself Emma needed more support, more encouragement." He turned slightly toward me, "But the truth is, you reminded me of my sister, the one who always got it right, the one who made everything look easy. I carried that resentment, and somehow it shaped how I saw you." I didn't reply. He nodded slowly, like he already knew what I wouldn't say when I met with my mother. It was different. She picked a neutral restaurant, one of those places with tall windows and soft music. She looked composed, but her hands fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said as soon as we sat. "What we did with your education. Money was wrong." She looked down, then back up. "But when you were little, you were so quick, so sharp, you reminded me of my brother, and not in a good way. He always made me feel small, and I didn't want to feel that way again, so I kept you at a distance. I let the words settle between us." "That's incredibly sad," I said for both of us. She nodded slowly but didn't say more. Her apology. If it was one didn't go deeper than that, she still believed she had done what was best. Even if the outcome was clearly wrong over the next month, the story of our dinner spread through the family. Cousins, aunts, uncles, some offered support. Others stayed quiet. My father's sister called and said she'd always seen the difference, but hadn't known what to do. My mother's brother claimed, Surprise said he never thought his sister capable of such things. Emma kept checking in. She started taking small steps. She ended her lease in Manhattan, moved into a shared apartment in Brooklyn, and got a job at a publishing house. Not glamorous, but steady. We started meeting for dinner once a week. Nothing fancy. Just time to talk and figure out what it meant to be sisters without the weight of what had been put on us during one of those dinners. I told her about the college fund I had set up for any kids. You or I might have, I explained, so no one in our family ever has to go through this again. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Once, no words. Just that the Andersons remained in my life in a way I hadn't expected when Caroline was diagnosed with breast cancer. I drove her to appointments, sat with her during treatments. We talked about more than business. Now sometimes we didn't talk at all, just sat in quiet mentoring. You has been one of the greatest joys of my life, she said one afternoon as we waited for her. Nurse, we never had children of our own, but meeting you made something whole for us. I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand until the nurse called her name. 6 months passed quickly after graduation. Most days I left for work before the sun was up and returned just as the lights in neighboring windows began to dim. My schedule was full, but the pace didn't bother me. I was used to motion. Goldman Sachs kept me busy. The projects were demanding the expectations high, but I liked the structure. I liked that every decision I made had weight attached to it. My team gave me space to grow. They didn't ask where I came from. Only whether I could deliver. My apartment in Manhattan was small, but warm. The first space I'd ever had that was entirely mine. I chose everything in it, from the rug by the door to the pale blue dishes in the cabinet. No one second-guessed my choices or tried to steer me towards something more practical. My father started calling once a week, not long conversations mostly. Updates about weather or traffic or headlines from the paper, but he always ended with the same words. I'm proud of you, Morgan. He said it like a fact, no longer as a surprise. My mother's path was slower. She still stumbled over boundaries, sometimes tried to steer conversations back to Emma, or offered opinions. No one asked for when she did. I would simply pause, then politely end the call she was learning. But it wasn't easy. Emma was the one who changed the most. She moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn with 2 roommates, no doorman, no concierge. She found an entry-level job at a publishing house filing manuscripts and proofreading labels on shipping envelopes. We met twice a month, sometimes more, always at the same tea shop near my office. She talked about work deadlines, the temperamental printer, the smell of ink in the stockroom. It doesn't pay much, she said once, but it's mine. I earned it. There was pride in her voice, the kind that didn't need to be declared, the kind that showed up in posture and timing, in the way she left her phone untouched during dinner. When I asked what shifted for her, she said, "You made it look possible. Not easy. Just possible. I'd never seen that before. We were becoming sisters for the first time, not just in name but in rhythm." The Andersons remained close, especially after Caroline's diagnosis. We spoke weekly, sometimes just a quick check-in, sometimes longer calls about treatment plans or updates from her doctors. I visited as often as I could, sitting with her during chemo, helping George manage appointments one afternoon while we waited for her to be called in. Caroline turned to me. "We never had children," she said, "but mentoring you has been one of the greatest joys of our lives." I didn't know how to answer, so I just nodded and held her hand. When Caroline felt strong enough, we began mentoring young women together, girls with talent but limited support, some from foster care, some first-generation college students, all of them uncertain where. They belonged in a world that often overlooked them. I shared my story sparingly, not the pain, but the blueprint, the things I'd learned about systems and scholarships and strategy. I told them how to read contracts, how to speak in meetings, how to ask questions without apology. I didn't tell them about the late nights or the years of silence or the weight of sitting at a table where no one saw you. Instead, I showed them what it looked like to take up space without needing permission. Emma joined one of our sessions. Once she sat quietly in the back, took notes, asked questions. Afterward, she said, "I want to help too, not with finances. I don't know any of that yet, but maybe something with writing or editing or whatever else they need." We started making plans, small ones at first, a joint scholarship fund, a book drive for underserved schools, a resume workshop at her company. It wasn't flashy, but it felt solid. Then came the invitation from our grandparents. Their 50th anniversary celebration was scheduled for late September at a country club near their home. A full guest list extended family from both sides. Old friends, neighbors I hadn't seen since high school. Grandma sent the invitation herself, handwritten in blue ink. It would mean a lot to have both of my girls there. Emma and I arrived early, helped set up photos, arranged flowers along the long banquet table. She wore a navy dress and low heels, her hair pinned up with 2 silver clips. I hadn't seen before. My parents arrived just before the speeches began. My mother in pearls, my father in a pressed gray suit. He gave a small nod when he saw us, nothing more. During the toast, Grandpa raised his glass to 50 years with my wife and to our granddaughters, Morgan and Emma, 2 remarkable women finding their own way. There was a quiet. After he spoke, the kind that settles when everyone knows something important. Just passed through the room after the music started. I stepped out onto the terrace. For a breath, my mother followed. A minute later, stood beside me without speaking for a while. Finally, she said, "I may never be the mother you deserved, but I'm trying to be better than I was." I didn't answer right away. We just looked out at the trees, the quiet lawn, the light fading at the edge of the property. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a start. The weekend after the anniversary party, I stayed in my apartment most of the time, cleaned out drawers, folded laundry, baked bread even though I rarely ate more than a slice. It helped to keep my hands busy. Emma called Sunday morning. She wanted to meet for a walk. Nothing big, just an hour around Prospect Park. We met near the entrance by the farmer's market. She had on sneakers and a denim jacket. Her hair pulled into a low braid. "They've been quiet," she said as we started walking. "Mom hasn't brought up the dinner. She hasn't mentioned the scholarship fund either." I nodded. "Same here. Dad called last Thursday. Just talked about the weather." Emma let out a slow breath. "I think they're trying to figure out what we want from them. And the truth is, I don't know either." We walked in silence for a bit, then she added, "Maybe it's not about what we want from them anymore. Maybe it's just about what we want now." I didn't say anything right away, but her words stayed with me all week back at work. Things were shifting. My team assigned me to a new client account, one that required more travel and broader responsibility. I started leading meetings, not just taking notes, started writing strategy, not just reviewing data. I stopped correcting people when they called me executive associate instead of junior analyst. I figured the title would catch up. Eventually, Caroline's treatments ended in November. She called from the hospital on her last day and said, "I'd like to do something to celebrate, but not a party, something real." We planned a mentoring event together, a weekend retreat for 10 young women chosen from our network. We reserved a small lodge in upstate New York and spent 2 days walking through case studies and career planning and quiet conversations by the fire. Emma came along too. She ran a writing session about personal storytelling. Helped a few of the girls clean up their resumes after dinner. "This is the first time I've ever taught anyone anything," she told me before bed. "It feels different from anything I've done before." In December, she invited me to her apartment for the first time. It was small but well cared for. There were books on the windowsill, dishes drying on a rack, a cork board on the wall with notes and photos pinned in neat rows I've been saving. She said not a lot, but enough to stop asking Mom and Dad for help. They don't even know I paid rent myself last month. We ate takeout on her couch and watched a holiday movie. Neither of us really followed the plot. We just let it play in the background. "I'm not mad at you anymore," she said after the credits rolled. I looked over. "I didn't know you were." She gave a small shrug. "I was for a while, not because you did anything wrong, just because you were always steady even when things fell apart. And I wasn't. I didn't know what to say to that, so I reached for the remote and started." The next movie, Christmas, came and went quietly. Our family did a small gathering at my grandparents' house. This time, Grandma kept the guest list short, just immediate family and no gifts. We sat around the fire after dinner, sipping coffee and watching the snow drift past the porch light. Grandpa handed out old photo albums, one for each of us, and said, "Take what you want, copy what you need, pass on what you don't." Emma and I sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through pictures of school plays and birthday cakes and family vacations that felt smaller than they looked. "That one was your 8th birthday," she said, pointing to a photo of me with a lopsided crown. "You made that cake yourself because Mom forgot to pick one up." I smiled. You cried, because I used the purple frosting. I still hate purple frosting. She laughed, then quieted. But you always made it work. The photo albums went back into boxes at the end of the night, but that one picture I kept slipped it into my bag without saying anything. In January, I submitted my first independent proposal at work, a full asset review with a new market model. My supervisor handed it back with 2 notes, one small correction and a scribbled line at the bottom. Strong voice. Let's build on this. I pinned the page to my office wall next to a card Caroline had sent me after her final scan. Your instincts will take you farther than you think. Emma's life moved forward too slowly. But with intention, she started waking up early, reading financial blogs, texting me screenshots of terms she didn't understand. She asked if I'd help her create a monthly budget. I want to know where my money actually goes. We met at a cafe with notebooks and highlighters and an old calculator that barely worked. We stayed until they closed the place and the owner turned off half the lights as a signal. Thank you, she said, as we packed up for not giving up on me before I knew who I was. The next week I got a call from my father. He asked if I had time for lunch. Just the 2 of us. I said yes. We met at a diner halfway between our neighborhoods. He ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese. Same as always, we talked for an hour, mostly about work and the market, and a book he was reading near the end. He said, "Your mother's trying. She won't always show it the right way. But she's trying." I nodded. I know. He set down his cup, and I want to say this clearly, in case I haven't before, you've made your own life. No one gave you a thing, and I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner. I didn't need more than that, not in that moment. As we stepped out into the cold, he pulled a folded receipt from his pocket. Emma asked me to give this to you. It's the balance on her student loan. She paid off the last of it this morning with her own check. I unfolded the slip and looked down at the 0 line at the bottom. Wanted you to know first, he said, before she tells your mom or anyone else. We stood on the sidewalk for a minute, then went our separate ways. Spring arrived quietly that year, the kind that crept in through open windows and settled across hardwood floors with the smell of rain and new leaves. I was working longer hours, but the pace felt manageable. No more proving, no more chasing. Just the rhythm of a life I had built. Emma called on a Tuesday. She wanted to show me something we met after work at her apartment. She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. It was a personal essay, a draft for a submission series. Her company was running. The title read, How I Learned to Carry My Own Name. I read it slowly, every line, steady and unflinching. She didn't blame anyone, not even herself. She simply told the truth in a voice I recognized now as hers. When I looked up, she said, I've spent so much of my life being who they expected. This is the first time I'm writing as me. I nodded. It sounds like you. She smiled and closed the laptop. Thank you for helping me find it later that week. I got a card in the mail from Caroline. It was handwritten, as always, short and simple. Just 3 lines. Strength runs quiet when it has nothing to prove. Thank you for walking beside me, love always. See, I kept it on my desk next to a photo of me and Emma from the retreat weekend, both of us laughing over mismatched mugs of tea. My parents stayed present, but smaller part of my world now, by my choosing my father called. Once a week, we talked about ordinary things, headlines, baseball. The state of interest rates my mother called less often, but when she did, the conversations were shorter, gentler. She didn't bring up old plans or expectations, just asked if I was sleeping enough, if the city still felt like home. She never fully apologized, not in the way I once hoped she would, but over time the silence between us became less sharp and more like space. I could breathe in. Grandpa visited in April. We met for breakfast at the same diner, where we'd had so many conversations over the years. He moved slower now, but his voice still carried the same quiet steadiness. You've done well, Morgan, he said, stirring his coffee. Not just in your work, but in the way you held your line with dignity. That's no small thing. I looked around at the chipped linoleum, the sunlight catching the window. He'd always seen me clearly even when others didn't. Before he left, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a copy of the trust letter, the original one he'd written all those years ago. Keep it, he said, as a reminder that your future was always worth investing in. I didn't cry, not then, but I tucked it carefully into my bag. I've learned that family isn't about fairness, it's about choices, the ones we inherit, and the ones we make ourselves. Some stories start with silence and end with noise. Mine began with being overlooked, but it didn't stay there. The real turning point wasn't the confrontation or the scholarship or even the job. It was the day I stopped needing them to see me and started seeing myself clearly enough to move forward without their permission. Emma and I are still writing our story, still figuring out how to be sisters without the shadow of old roles. We don't get it perfect, but we try, and that trying has brought us closer than I ever thought possible. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel like the afterthought in your own life, I hope you know this. Your worth was never tied to who clapped for you. You were always the main story, even when they didn't read the page. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If any part of it felt familiar, I hope you'll share your story too. And if you're still walking through your own quiet transformation, just know you're not walking alone.